The early days, oh, a better nation, fair and free, Scotland.
Hello, this is Scottish Independence podcast number 98, and this time I spoke to the Chief Executive of Yes Scotland, Blair Jenkins. We talked about the things he felt went well in the campaign and the things he felt didn't go so well. We also talked about the media's role in the campaign, and finally about how things have been reorganising themselves since the end of the vote, and where to now for the Yes movement. So, we'll just go straight to the conversation, and we'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Blair, how's it going?
Very well, Michael, yeah, good.
So, first question, I suppose, that's more than a month past. What have you been up to since the referendum?
Well, there was obviously quite a lot to do in the couple of weeks after the referendum, just in terms of winding things down, and also a lot of media follow-up of different kinds. But I'd arranged some time ago to be away from about 2 weeks after the referendum to take a break and just decompress, or whatever the right verb is. So I'm back now. Been back some 10 days or so, and just obviously picking up on things, tuning into the always interesting developments that are happening, and the fact that the debate goes on and the arguments go on, clearly.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I've heard many times since the referendum is that a lot of people on the yes side feel that we won the argument, but we lost the referendum. How do you feel about that idea?
I think that's definitely right, and I think the evidence of that piles up day after day. I think there's no doubt we ran the better campaign, and there were two independent polls done in the course of the last 12 months, which asked people which had been the more effective of the two campaigns, and by I think a 2-1 majority in both those polls said that Yes Scotland had been a more effective campaign than Better Together. It is it's one of these ironic things. Yes, I think we won the campaign and lost the referendum, but I do believe that the momentum we created and the fact that the case was so well made and we now have such a strong platform will now determine the future of Scotland as a society, as a political entity, because I think there is now just a direction of travel, and all the momentum is still with the people who argued the yes case.
Yeah, so if we can get down to some of those specifics, because we did, after all, lose the referendum, unfortunately, and a lot of people still struggling to kind of come to terms with it, but we need to quickly, what with some of the developments that have happened since. But again, we'll come to that. But just firstly, I was going to ask you 3 things you think that the Yes campaign did well, and 3 things the Yes campaign could have done better, because after all, we lost the referendum. We'll start with the 3 things you think they did well.
Well, I think one of the most important things about the Yes campaign, and obviously it was what we intended from the start, was that it was a grassroots campaign. That was something that we intended. I certainly had planned right from the beginning. It was clearly the way that we had to go, and it was the way in which we would try and redress the balance that we obviously were not going to get support from much of the mainstream media, particularly commercial press. And one of the more obvious ways of countering that was the grassroots campaign. And the network of local groups that we set up just kept growing and mushrooming and developing in fantastic ways. And the strength of that is something that's still being felt in Scotland, and I think is going to serve us very well in the future. So I think the grassroots campaign was something one would definitely want to point to as being a real success. I think we got the tone and conduct of the campaign right. I think that was really important, because I think in terms of making the campaign easy for people who were not necessarily Yes supporters 2 years ago, to make it easy for people to join and make it attractive for people to join. I always thought it was really important that we got the tone right, that we were positive, that we were inclusive, that we were a diverse and a tolerant campaign. And I think we did get the tone right, and that made that campaign attractive. And a lot of people, I think, surprised themselves, and some of them surprised me, by moving to Yes over the course of the campaign, certainly from a position at the beginning where they were not inclined towards supporting Scottish independence. Those would be 2 of the obvious points. And I suppose the third that occurs, and I think there are other things, but you asked for 3. I suppose the third thing would be, I think we definitely managed to be much, much stronger on social media, which again was hugely important to counter the mainstream media bias, if you like, against us. And that was, I think, the real strength of the campaign. In fact, it was a combination, I think, of the strength on social media and the strength at grassroots. It was that particular combination that characterised the campaign, and the 2 things working in harmony and reinforcing each other I think became quite a strong defining feature of the campaign almost. It was certainly the thing a lot of the international press, international media picked up on and were very interested in and are still interested in. I'm still getting a stream of journalistic and academic requests for interviews and so on and so forth. And then it's really that dynamic they want to talk about, the interrelation between those two things. So I think those were the things from a campaign perspective that worked particularly well.
Certainly agree with that as well. Just the one thing there, do you think that, when you look at the demographics of the vote breakdown, it shows the kind of success and failure a bit of that strategy? Because younger people that are more likely to be on social media and involved in grassroots campaigns, all voted yes. And then the demographics of the older people who generally aren't looking so much at social media, the demographics of the vote itself backs up your point.
I think that's right, but I mean, we obviously were aware all the way through of the fact that a lot of people, not just older people, but a lot of people for all sorts of reasons, some to do with living in pretty deprived economic circumstances, did not have ready access to the internet and to social media, as well as the age factor. So we always knew that there were parts of the population we would not reach through social media. I think there were areas which we did reach, but what I think was particularly important was that social media was driving, if you like, awareness of and attendance at a lot of the community-based events. So it was where a lot of the more committed and more active people were organising themselves and organising events and then spreading the news, if you like, about what really worked well or this didn't work so well. And that's how the movement became, I think, so dynamic and so organic in nature. But we always knew, I mean, it was always the case right from the start, polling showed it, our own polling showed it, that the older part of the population, for all sorts of reasons, were going to be the most challenging demographic group for us, not just because of the media that typically older people consume. Also, I think arguably people who's had a longer attachment to the United Kingdom as an idea or as a political union. And, the more you were, if not part of, but immediately post, if you like, the Second World War generation, where notions of Britishness and the UK were very strong in the setting up of the NHS, the more you had a personal connection to those years and those events, I think maybe the stronger your wish to maintain a connection with the UK. Then there was obviously the fact that clearly also the nature of the No campaign, which I'm sure we'll come on to, which was very much based on trying to intimidate people through threats, warnings about the risk to their standard of living. I think some of those threats and warnings were particularly aimed at older people and aimed at the issue of pensions. Although I think we did make attempts to counter that and to present a clear argument as to why pensions were secure and indeed might improve in an independent Scotland, inevitably there was an impact that people felt there was a risk there that some in the end were not prepared to take.
So do you think pensions is one of the things that we could have done better? But
I'm not sure we could have done that. I think it's one of the interesting things, because, given that we're all Scottish and we're all, self-criticism is a national sport. So it's one of the things particularly adept at. But, having had lots and lots of conversations with a lot of the people who were sent up to the campaign and key to the campaign, you can look at areas and say, well, that was a challenging area for us. But then when you actually look at, how could we have changed that? That sometimes is a bit more difficult because some of the areas were just genuinely challenging areas. But it's not to say things couldn't be done better, of course. And I'm sure lots has been learned in the course of the campaign.
Sorry to keep coming back to it, but what else do you think could have been done better, if there is anything?
Well, I think things that were real challenges for us, irrespective of whether we could have done better with it. Clearly, we faced a constant challenge to get a fair hearing in a number of newspaper titles, not them all, but in a number of newspaper titles. And there's an extent to which what's in the press will still have an impact, even though people talk about declining influence and declining circulations. Front pages of newspapers are still seen by a lot of people who don't necessarily buy them because they're sitting there on the shelf in the shop. And to some extent, newspapers also determine more these days the approach or the content or the agenda of the broadcasters, in part because broadcasters tend to be working on less resources than they were some years ago. And I think there's more of a tendency now than in the days when I was active in newsrooms and in broadcasting to lift stuff from the papers or to lift parts of your agenda from the press. And I think that certainly was a challenge. Again, not one that we were surprised by or unprepared for, but was a constant challenge for us during the campaign.
And to move on to the No campaign, in the Yes Scotland offices, what was the strategy adopted to deal with them? Was it a case of like, we'll just ignore them, they'll do what they want to do and we'll do what we want to do? Or was it a case of trying to address what their talking points were? Or was it a mix and match of both things?
Well, you always want to be on your own agenda rather than responding to other people's. And insofar as Yes could, we did try to set the agenda and to be doing things that would be of interest to the media, that would be picked up and prominent in the media. And I think we're very successful in some areas. I think across the Yes movement generally, within Yes Scotland, also in other parts of the Yes movement, I think there was a great deal more visual imagination, for instance. So we often found that it was pictures from the Yes campaign that dominated the media, even in some cases in parts of the media which weren't necessarily sympathetic to us. They were using our pictures more prominently because we were more visually imaginative, whether it was, giant yeses formed by people or wherever else it was, or the wish tree or other things that different parts of the movement were doing. I think there were just more compelling and more imaginative things on the Yes side, which sometimes demanded attention. But obviously, from the start, as is well known, we faced an incredible barrage of negativity, of attack, of Project Fear. And quite often there were substantial parts of the media which were only too willing to run that stuff largely unexamined, to run it at face value, not to challenge it or to take it as anything other than face value. So quite often we did find ourselves reacting to that. You don't want to be doing that more than you can help. But clearly the full resources of the UK government were being deployed to attack the very concept of Scottish independence. And as I say, you had a media a large part of which was only too happy to give prominence and uncritical coverage to those lines of attack. But the interesting thing, I think, is, and we countered that best we could in mainstream media, I think, and ran a very effective, I think, in the context in which we're operating, a very effective communications campaign. But also, it was where the strength of the ground campaign and what was happening in social media was also very important, because we took the view, and I think we were right, that while people were receiving information from different sources and there was lots of stuff out there, in the end, we felt people were more likely to be influenced by the people they knew and trusted in their own communities and whom they'd be talking to about the referendum. And my own view is that is what happened. I think the conversational model was a very powerful model for the Yes campaign. I mean, when my appointment was announced in that week, I was asked in my first broadcast interview, wasn't this impossible because I'd been a poll that week and Yes was on 27%. And I said, I'll just need everyone who's already intending to vote Yes to persuade one other person. And it was almost an arithmetical point when I made it, but it actually, the more you thought about it, that was the way it was going to work, was that conversationally people were going to be interested in the subject, interested in the arguments around independence. And we felt the more information they got, the more they talked to people they trusted and liked, the more likely they were to move to Yes. And I do think that was the experience that Yes supporters had. I think it was the dynamic of the campaign, was as we gave more and more people more and more information, and they talked to more folk within their own circle of acquaintance and people in their own community, then support built. And I think more than anything else, that was what got us from initially a low level of support in the summer of 2012 to what was verging on half the population by the time we get to September of this year.
And now that a little time has passed since the referendum, with some of the Project Fear stuff, some of the more ludicrous stories, George Robertson threatening apocalypse or saying that we've not got our own culture and our own language and our own traditions and so on, was there a time where you personally or Yes Scotland found it very hard not to say something? Because I know that Yes Scotland were very careful to always appear positive, but was there a couple of times, there must have been, where you found it very hard just not to go on the attack about something or other?
Oh, I think we did. You see, I think I would agree that we were overwhelmingly the more positive campaign, but we did obviously respond very robustly to the strange remarks that George Robertson made on that occasion. It's not the only occasion when he's made strange remarks, but those were particularly strange. And other interventions from Cameron or Osborne or other people, we would react strongly. But I always thought it was right for us. I don't believe in demonising people who have a different view anyway. And I think you always had to be attacking the line of argument rather than if you like, the integrity of the individual or whatever, which I don't think was necessarily something a distinction the other side made all the time. But I think in terms of what we were doing, which was to try to make our campaign inclusive, make it attractive to people who were perhaps not instinctively going to be yes